Thanks so much, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today to tell you a little bit about Jobs for the Future's recently released report, Exploring the Green Infrastructure Workforce. So just to start out, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Jobs for the Future, for those of you who may not be familiar with our organization. We're a national nonprofit that builds education and economic opportunity for underserved populations across the United States. We focus on developing innovative programs and public policies that help increase both college readiness and career success, and really help to build a more highly skilled and competitive workforce. And a few of the different areas of our work are highlighted here, both kind of building the research base through better understanding what works and why, translating that research into action through technical assistance and other implementation projects, and then, of course, providing support to our partners, which range from the education to workforce development systems. So the NatureWORKS study is a national green infrastructure workforce study, which was funded jointly by the Forest Service as well as the Kresge Foundation. And it really focused on better understanding and characterizing green infrastructure jobs and careers. And on this project, we collaborated with the Cornell University Institute for Wage and Compensation Studies, and we looked at a number of workforce trends related to green infrastructure, which include things like employment levels, job titles, compensation, the education and skill requirements that are typically asked for within green infrastructure jobs, and then, of course, the potential of green infrastructure to really spur job creation within the communities within which it's implemented. And then we looked at and really tried to understand various strategies to support and expand urban green infrastructure employment in both the public and private sectors. So in my presentation today, I'm going to, I told you a little bit about JFS and the NatureWORKS study itself. I am going to present some of our key report findings and give you a sense of what we found through this several year-long study. And then I'll move into a discussion of both some of the recommendations and implications for key stakeholders that emerged from this group. And we really focused in on understanding, what can government, philanthropy, education and training, and then policymakers do to broadly support green infrastructure workforce development. So now that you know just a little bit about our approach, I want to kind of ground us by talking about the definition of green infrastructure that we used within our study. So we drew this from the Conservation Fund and defined green infrastructure as a collection of natural lands, working landscapes, open spaces, and appropriate construction interventions that can serve ecosystem function and provide benefits to human populations. And you see some examples there. These are prototypical examples. They're not all of what we kind of included within green infrastructure, but just so that this definition incorporates both some of the stormwater management type interventions, like permeable pavement and green roofs, as well as the more natural ecosystem building interventions, if you want to call them that, such as open space and parks and gardens. So you just saw the infographic version, and here's what green infrastructure looks like in real life. To give a better visualization, here are a couple of examples. So green infrastructure, there's a wide range here, and you can see just a couple of specific examples that were drawn from first Washington, D.C., and then from Wilmington, Delaware. So in addition to some of the more quantitative research that I mentioned before, as I noted, we did, in collaboration with Cornell, a pretty detailed not only wage and compensation study, but also analysis of workforce trends. We also did some qualitative work to complement that. So we looked across a number of cities nationwide. You see them listed there. And within each of these cities, we did some pretty in-depth interviews with stakeholders involved in green infrastructure. And these included both folks at the public, within the public sector, working for city parks organizations, water management organizations, and also in many cases when we could, large contractors or others who are involved in this work. So we chose our cities in collaboration with the Forest Service to really, pinpoint a number of different natural ecosystems, a number of different geographies, and to kind of get a sense of what the green infrastructure workforce looks like nationwide. So how do we think about green infrastructure jobs? Within our study, we really honed in specifically on a subset of green infrastructure related jobs. So these are the green infrastructure installation, maintenance, and inspection occupations. So when you hear me, in this presentation kind of refer to green infrastructure jobs in shorthand, I'm really focusing on those installation, maintenance, and inspection jobs. We felt like those were particularly important because those are the frontline workers, folks involved in those type of tasks and their immediate supervisors. They're the frontline workers doing green infrastructure, and they really are typically those who devote a significant portion of their time to this work. So we didn't include some of the more professional level jobs like landscape architects or horticulturalists, for example. We're thinking more about, folks in the sectors that you see listed on the slide. So folks, doing frontline construction work, landscaping and groundskeeping, urban forestry, tree care, and then ecological restoration. And together, across the 30 occupations that we focused on within this study, we estimate that there are approximately 3 million people who may be involved in green infrastructure related work. And I'll say a little bit more about that in the slides that come. So of course, across our 30 occupations, the actual involvement in green infrastructure varies significantly. So for some individuals, green infrastructure constitutes a significant portion of what they do on a day-to-day basis, and within other occupations, it's much less so. So here you see a subset of our 30 occupations with higher levels of green infrastructure involvement. So you see, many of these are still fairly low, but you see on the lower end of the spectrum, 10 to 15%. Those are first-line supervisors of landscaping and groundskeeping workers, construction and building inspectors, and then moving up to tree trimmers and pruners, for which it's estimated that they typically spend between 1/4 and 75% of their work on green infrastructure related activities. So what are some other characteristics of the green infrastructure workforce? So across our 30 installation, maintenance, and inspection jobs, we saw that most of them have fairly low barriers to entry. They typically require a high school degree or less. There are a couple, including environmental engineering technicians and forest and conservation technicians, that do require an associate's degree, but that was not very common across our 30 occupations. The compensation is fairly typical for jobs at that education level. On the low end, they range. On the low end, they're around $11.50 an hour and range up to $26 an hour. And then the skills related to these jobs really range from, really include a mix of both technical and employability skills. We also looked into what projected growth across green infrastructure installation, maintenance, and inspection occupations looks like over the next 5 years. So as we look ahead, we saw that even though the number of workers who do green infrastructure installation, maintenance, and inspection is fairly small. We are projected to see an increase within these jobs in the next 5 years. So many of them are projected to experience pretty strong growth. And you see, especially high for some of the septic tank servicers and sewer pipe cleaners, and then a little bit lower for some such as cement masons and concrete finishers. And this is based on, and I'll say that these and the data that I showed a moment ago are both based on an analysis of MZ data. So with strong growth, we're seeing kind of a concurrent trend of employers needing, additional skills or skill upgrades within their green infrastructure workforce. So we did, as I mentioned, kind of in the opening, we did a survey. We did a survey of contractors to better understand, did they have pain points in, meeting their workforce needs for green infrastructure, and if so, what did those look like, and around which occupations did those occur? So within that survey of our contractors, we found that employers reported that they typically have to pay a premium to secure individuals with green infrastructure skills. And a number of them noted that in order to take on more green infrastructure projects, they would really need workers to develop new skills and, in most cases, bring on additional workers. Supervisory skills, as you see from this chart right here, is an area in which there is a particularly high need. You see both the first-line supervisors of landscaping workers as well as those for horticulture workers, and then a little bit lower for some of the other occupations listed below. Further, employers not only do they need skill upgrades, but they're also having trouble in the moment finding workers whom they can hire. So the occupations in greatest demand that emerged from our survey of contractors are listed here. And one thing to note kind of as context, each of these 6 occupations, except for nursery and greenhouse workers, have really pretty strong wages. Each of those, except the one I mentioned, pay at least $15 an hour. So they're good jobs. And from this slide and the last couple that I showed, I think you can see a clear picture that there is a need to not only upskill the green infrastructure workforce, but also professionalize and expand the number of people who are ready, willing, and able to do this work. So just to briefly summarize some of our findings before I move into our recommendations. The overall workforce devoted to green infrastructure installation, maintenance, and inspection activities is fairly small. Of that 3 million individuals I noted across the 30 occupations, we estimate that, only a subset of them, about 6%, are most likely actually involved in green infrastructure work on a, day-to-day regular basis. Keeping in mind some of the education requirements, we saw that the barriers to entry within these jobs they're fairly low, and they represent strong opportunities for folks who are seeking strong entry-level jobs that especially provide a stepping stone into the workforce. Thirdly, of the 30 occupations that are involved in green infrastructure work, there's overall strong projected growth or good projected growth through the year 2020. And even though, it demonstrates that there's an increased need for green infrastructure workforce, the overall numbers in some cases haven't quite reached what many advocates have hoped. So it's not, we're still talking about a fairly small number of jobs, even though there are increases within demand projected in our target occupations. And then finally, to summarize, there's an important need to not only kind of upskill, but also professionalize these workers to meet current employment demand. And, our recommendations touch on this in a little bit more detail. but the efforts to create, for example, a national green infrastructure certification program represent a really important step in facilitating this process. So we highlighted recommendations for a number of different stakeholder groups. We saw, across the green infrastructure community at large, there's a real need to just continue to educate folks, from policymakers, legislators, and even government leaders about the many benefits that green infrastructure conveys to communities. And I think, that's known among the subset of people who understand and are excited about that work. A lot of our interviewees, are so passionate about green infrastructure, but I think, it's still an area in which there's a lack of understanding, especially at the government and policy level within some communities. So we saw, a need to kind of support that, and then also, as I've mentioned, a need to really diversify and professionalize the workforce. Within the philanthropic community, we saw some potential for funders to really act as connectors and help to kind of coalesce and align efforts within communities around green infrastructure, and also to play an important role in that, knowledge building that I mentioned a moment ago, really, fostering these type of initiatives across different areas in order to build out the green infrastructure workforce and knowledge of the benefits of green infrastructure more broadly. Funders, of course, can also play an important role in coordinating and aligning work across different stakeholder groups. Regional intermediaries are one potential, way to do that, but there are others as well, and we saw just that need for coordination and alignment so that people involved in green infrastructure and green infrastructure workforce development can kind of come together and think and problem solve as a sector, not just as kind of individual nodes and groups kind of working on their own initiatives, but really, take almost a sector-based approach to thinking about these issues. Within the education and training community, even though there are some career pathways, maps, and kind of lattices that are devoted to green infrastructure. I know that there's one for arboriculture that's been used fairly widely and disseminated, but there's a real need for just clear maps of the trajectories through which individuals can progress within green infrastructure across the course of their career. So as we're thinking about the opportunity that many of these green infrastructure jobs present, especially for folks who are, looking to enter into the workforce, who may be looking to build their resume, establish, employment history, everyone from, in some cases, individuals with disabilities or those who are returning from incarceration, but also other populations who are, looking to, these types of jobs in particular as an entree into the workforce. We see a need to, not just get them into that like landscaping job or, some of the other green infrastructure jobs, but also ensure that that's part of a progressive map and help them see how they can progress over time from that job into either more professional, higher paying, family sustaining opportunities. Within, the education and workforce system, there's also an opportunity to just raise awareness around what types of jobs are available in green infrastructure. I know there are community college initiatives around sustainability, and a number of schools do have some green infrastructure related programs, but that's not the norm. So in communities where a lot of this work is happening, there's definitely a capacity for not only the awareness building, but also ensuring that there are clear pathways available for those entering type of occupations. Among policymakers, we recommended that policymakers sit at a critical point and are able to really accelerate national momentum for green infrastructure projects. And this might include supporting the diversification and professionalization of green infrastructure work and the green infrastructure workforce through specific projects. They can also serve as really important public advocates for this work and have the ability to support different strategies like incentive funds and other types of investments that build out not only the green infrastructure interventions and the presence of green infrastructure, but also often expand the workforce need within communities. I'm not going to be showing our video today, but I know that Emilio can share the link to a video that we have on the JFF website that kind of highlights some of the key findings in, it's about a 3-minute clip that I think you'll enjoy, and it includes a number of the researchers and folks who worked on our paper. So I encourage you, if you have a few moments, take a little bit of time to watch our video and then visit the NatureWORKS website, because we have a number of blogs and kind of articles and resources that we collected as we did our research that I think you all as interested individuals in green infrastructure I think will enjoy and find something useful. So with that, thank you all so much. I look forward to the Q&A later in the presentation, and I will turn it back to Kathy.